Hello, everybody, and welcome to Web and Beyond Live for October 4th, 2021. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, president of W3 Consulting and managing director of W3C Web Services, which of course provides affordable web and WordPress hosting, domain name registration, and other web-related services primarily for small business. Web and Beyond Live is our weekly show about topical and timely small business digital marketing related issues. Really, my commentary on what's going on in the world of digital and small business. Whether you're watching live or the replay or listening to the podcast afterward, feel free to ask questions in the chat or the comments section wherever you're seeing it, and I'll do my best to answer them. And of course, you can always tweet at me at W3 Consulting. That is W, the number 3 Consulting on Twitter, and I'll be happy to respond to you there. Today, we're going to be talking about a couple of Google items, then talking a little bit about kind of how much you can fake it till you'll make it in the startup world. We'll talk a little bit about startup financing, a QR code payment tool in the restaurant world, and what that really means for touchless payments and payment processes going forward with small businesses. And then I wanted to close out the discussion today with a discussion on or commentary on the Global State of Small Business report that was published for September 2021 by the Data for Good, the Facebook team called Data for Good. And so I'm going to close this out with discussion on that component. And so let's get right into the news here. First and foremost, Google has decided to shut down the Plex banking service that they had launched in partnership with Citi, and it seems like it has been shut down, and it will probably go away. At least the Plex branding will go away in some way, shape, or form. Google Pay is not leaving the financial services space. I think this particular program was just stymied by the pandemic, and they've chosen to go ahead and shut it down. So it just joins many other products that have hit the graveyard in the Google world, and that's just unfortunate. But I think it's understandable considering so many folks have had issues, during the pandemic, and banks are having issues with regard to just organizing their employees and staff and making sure those things are happening. So I foresee Google coming back to this once we get into next year. But obviously, this is not going to be under the Plex branding. Is that YouTube has come out with a fairly, I think, strong stance, which is that they are going to be limiting the amount of medical misinformation on YouTube according to their new guidelines. And so there's a link to this in the video description, or I'll place a link to this in the video description afterward. But this is their vaccine misinformation policy. There's actually a little video here that covers it, and it says specifically here, quoting from the support article, YouTube doesn't allow content that poses a serious risk of egregious harm by spreading medical misinformation about currently administered vaccines that are approved and confirmed to be safe and effective by local health authorities and by the World Health Organization, WHO. So this policy basically says that they are going to be removing that content from YouTube when those things come out. They give some examples here about misinformed or disinformed claims and other claims about side effects for various vaccines, which are not scientifically valid. They do talk about educational, scientific, artistic, or testimonial content. Those will not be removed. And then regarding content violations, if you do violate the policy, they will go ahead and usually the first time give a warning. And then after that, they will start taking down content, and that will be strikes against your channel. Basically, if you hit 3 strikes in a 90-day period, then your channel will be terminated. Okay, so this is just a point of reference for us all in small business, that when we are using something like YouTube or Facebook or otherwise, we're using somebody else's property, right? So we have to live and abide by their rules. This is not censorship. This is not a free speech issue. This is just that they are a private platform and they are capable of limiting our business speech in this particular regard. Now, they, of course, are not only limiting us based on vaccine misinformation. There's a whole host of other policies just regarding misinformation, for example. So they have misinformation around elections and other kinds of things. But generally, I actually recommend you go up 2 layers to the YouTube policies generally, and they tell you some best practices for you to create good videos. But the other side is they actually talk about sensitive content like nudity and sexual content, spam and deceptive practices that you might not know you're doing, but ultimately they consider them bad practices, violent or dangerous content, regulated goods like firearms and other kinds of goods that are regulated like cannabis or otherwise, misinformation we just talked about, and then of course legal policies regarding use of trademark, counterfeit materials, defamation of folks, those kinds of things. So this is just a really good policies page for you to review in depth so that you're just aware of what YouTube says is good for you to be able to post and what they don't think you should be posting on the platform generally. Many times when people come to me and say, "Hey, my channel has been, posted a warning, or my channel has been terminated," if they've gotten a warning, it's usually, innocent. They didn't really know what they were doing. But once you get a three strikes and you're out kind of situation, you've been pushing the envelope with regard to YouTube enough. And you knew what you were doing. So I'm not particularly too, empathetic when it comes to those situations. But you can kind of cross the law of YouTube very fairly easily with innocent intent. So the idea here is to just get informed and know what you're doing in that regard. Okay, next up is we are currently in and amidst the Theranos case against, this is the case against, Rebecca Holmes, who was the CEO of Theranos. And we are kind of reckoning with how much can you fake it till you make it in the startup world. And while this is among, well-funded VCs, this article talks about WeWork and their calamities. They didn't really touch on Uber, but Uber is another, one of those companies that just has had a lot of dishonesty in its practices. So they talk about WeWork, they talk about latest Aussie Media, which recently shut down, and their CEO supposedly says they're going to reopen again, that kind of thing. These venture-backed companies, these venture-backed startups are really in a bind because Silicon Valley really sets you up for this perspective that you should be not necessarily lying outright, but that you should be showing an appearance that somehow you can make your startup work in and against the odds. And so this makes CEOs and founders of startups really fudge numbers. They have some unethical practices and those kinds of things. And just generally, I like to say, be optimistic as a founder, especially of a small business, but also understand that most small businesses don't move forward past a year's time frame. And when we have such low success rates in entrepreneurship, that's not to say that you won't come back and rebound and do some other entrepreneurial venture. But most small businesses, most new startups don't last, and there should be no shame in that. Stumbling toward entrepreneurial success. But this whole notion that somehow people are overnight successes, a lot of these cultural relics need to be let go of so we can focus on actually building good businesses, making the economic development agencies and authorities that are available come into contact with more small businesses, more startups, and that allows them to be have greater efficacy, long-term sustainability, and ultimately greater impact, positive impact on communities. So this whole notion of kind of faking it till you make it, I know that everybody seems and feels a need to do so, but I just think that, being truthful in regard to your situation is probably going to get you further in building out a business and also being optimistic in that sense. And so I don't think there's a need to balance honesty and optimism in the generalized world of small business and startups. Maybe there's just a localized problem in Silicon Valley and in other high VC funded startup environments. But I think that generally we as small business owners should just be honest and optimistic, and we'll generally have better outcomes for doing so. But don't feel so bad about the fact that maybe your first entrepreneurial venture doesn't work out the way you want it to, because that is the norm. Don't think you are some outlier that you're stumbling from this particular item to the next will be somehow a scarlet letter on you forever. It is just a learning experience toward hopefully an outcome of a final entrepreneurial success. Next up is that this TechCrunch article comes from a TechCrunch Disrupt panel that talked about revenue generation and how to build up capital regarding the business, and that there are many different new types of alternative capitals. So I just wanted to like throw this onto your radar to be aware that you do have so many more options than venture capital when it comes to starting a business today. That can come from crowdfunding platforms like Republic, which allows you to basically sell equity in a company. I've now seen several companies use Republic and WeFunder. There are also platforms where people can support you through Patreon and Memberful and other kinds of platforms that are recurring revenues for you. And then there's basically the sovereign writer movement. And I think it's really the sovereign creator movement, whereby direct platforms are giving you the capability of getting paid by and directly from your audience. And so as you build your audience in those particular businesses, you're in essence getting funding to basically build the business further and greater. So there's less, I'm guessing, less dominance in the VC AC world, especially in the small business and startup space. I think as startups want to scale, they may then seek out a seed or a Series A funding round, and that's going to bring them up to the next level and the next level beyond that. But staying private longer, at least in my perspective, gives you greater control as a business and really can set the tone for a little bit more stability and sustainability for that small business. Most small businesses are not rocketing to unicorn status. They're staying small. They're staying small on purpose, and they're doing good in their community. And if we can focus on those businesses and not so much on the big splashy Theranoses of the world, maybe we would have less, lawsuits against founders for millions and billions of dollars in lost VC funding, and for all the various crimes that are alleged in those types of cases. We just have an opportunity here to think how to use technology in ways that, and we're going to talk about this in the global status of the global state of small business report. We can think about ways in which we can actually utilize this for greater economic development for small businesses and the communities they serve, and think about the ways in which digital can make that happen. And we just have the tools now today. It's just a matter of getting people aware of the tools and how to use them best, so that they don't fall into these pitfalls of the wrong paths, and certainly taking on debt that they don't need to take on, or giving away equity in their company to these large venture capital firms that may impose stronger, exert stronger force than founders really want them to. Okay, just a quick story about this. This is a company called CEO, and payments.com had an article about them talking about the way in which they allowed QR code payments in restaurants. So Sunday is a point of sale system that is QR code based. So customers come, and on the table or on a menu, you can scan a QR code, and QR for quick response. Those are those 2D barcodes. You've probably seen them now since the pandemic. And these little QR codes, your phone, it's built into your phone. So you just have to find it in your phone. It's usually built into your camera application. If not, you can install and use the Lens app by Google. And so if you just install Google Lens on iOS or Android, both tools will allow you to do this. But you basically hover the camera of your phone inside of the Lens app, and it will go ahead and show, hey, this QR code navigates to a particular link. Now, the idea here with Sunday is that if you go to a restaurant, for example, you can go ahead and scan this QR code. You set up an account, probably the first time, and then after you do that, you go ahead and are able to order and pay all from the table. So you don't need to have a server, or have to go up to a counter like in a diner environment and do that whole checkout process. You could do it right there sitting at the table, which of course means that it's cashless, and it's a very easy process once you get yourself set up in the system. So I think this is something that just, I don't know, for me, it really makes me think about the fact that across the board, we're starting to see more and more touchless payment opportunities, QR codes being the simplest way to implement these, because it's just navigating from not having to write or type in an address. So it's taking people through the process of just scanning a code, which is very similar to scanning a barcode. UPC code at the grocery store is just scanning a code, but instead of just ringing up a price, it's actually navigating them to a website where they can interact with the business in real time, in real space. There are so many opportunities for this technology to be used, and I see few businesses taking advantage of it. And I want to see more businesses starting to see how they can use this technology. This includes Google Pay and Apple Pay and other touchless payment opportunities just by going to your payment processor and figuring out how your merchant services works. You can usually add on those features, and that increases, right? Especially in the case of the pandemic, but even post pandemic, I see this as an opportunity again. And I've said this time and time again, that you're promoting a culture of safety for your customers to feel comfortable with spending money in your business, around your business, with your business. And so Sunday is just another one of those tools in your toolbox that you can use if you are a restaurateur or in that food business space. But there are others out there who are doing this work and allowing for payment through a QR code process. I think Intuit's QuickBooks has these things going on in their payment systems. There are others out there, Square and others. So look for these types of options of touchless payment, and where just, as simple as possible, a QR code that provides that level of payment process. And also remember that you can use QR codes for almost anything on the web. So you can direct people to websites, to materials, those kinds of things. And they're really best in locations, right? They're best for a fixed location where someone's going to be able to put their phone up to a QR code, scan it, and then take that link with them to go do stuff with it. So if you want to be able to navigate people to places while they're in your physical environment in a safe way, them not having to touch things or interact with them for germ or virus purposes, you can go ahead and use these QR codes. So I highly recommend them. Front door of your business, right? You can put them right on the front door, have people navigate to your e-commerce site, as opposed to them coming up to your store and realizing you're closed and not being able to purchase from you right now. They can scan a QR code right on the door and be taken to the storefront. They can order and maybe pick it up or have it delivered. These are the kinds of things that really help increase the overall profitability of the business, and they're very easy mitigations. They're very easy behavioral interventions to place into the business operations. Okay, so last but not least, I wanted to have a conversation about the September 2021 Global State of Small Business report that the Data for Good team at Facebook put together. And in essence, particular report just covers the highlights of, this is the executive summary that I have open in front of me, but the full report really goes over some really important components about what's going on in relation to the recovery efforts around the world. I'm going to really focus here on the small business components, but I just felt like some of these things were really interesting to talk through with you all. So first and foremost, the report, as it notes here, examines the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, on SMBs or small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses across the planet. And so this particular survey covered 35,000 SMBs, 30 countries and territories, and it was carried out in July of 2021. So they did this in 2021, crunched the numbers, and then produced this report in September. So the things that really stood out for me are here on page 3 of the executive summary. They say that overall, SMBs worldwide are showing signs of recovery. This is great, with closure rates, receding, and COVID rates still fluctuating. Closure rates are still down, and of course, that means an increased amount of sales, because when businesses aren't closed, they're selling. So that says 16% of U.S. SMBs, quoting here from the report. 16% of US SMBs reported that they were closed at the time of the survey. That was down from 22% in February of 2021. So you see an 8 point, is that an 8 point? 6 point difference in reduction in terms of those who have been closed. And on the flip side of that, 44% of US SMBs reported a rise in sales in July of 2021 compared to the same period just in 2020. And so that means that's good. The fall in sales was 34%. So rise in sales 44%, fall in sales 34%. So I think that's good on the whole, that we're actually seeing some positive movements there. On the employment side, we can see again that 24% of US SMBs reported reduced employment, and that's down from 27% in February of 2021. So just in that March, April, May, June, July, so 6 month time frame from February to July, we're seeing a 3 point reduction in reduced employment. So we're seeing a little bit of movement in that regard, but we still are having a mismatch problem, right? We have a labor force that's mismatched with the needs of the firm at the present moment. And so SMBs are struggling to find employees appropriately. Noting on the digital tools side, I found these statistics to be really interesting. Again, quoting here, 69% of small businesses, SMBs worldwide, reported that digital tools positively impacted their business during the pandemic. 60% of SMBs reported using digital tools to advertise. That's up from 40% in February 2021. So, again, a 20% increase in the number of SMBs who are using digital tools, predominantly advertising, to get in front of their customers in just the last 6 months. 86%, again, quoting, 86% of SMBs indicated that they expect to run their operations at least partly using digital tools in the future. If we look at the proportion of businesses here, I want to jump over to the digital. Here we are. So that's page 10. So if we jump to page 10, here we go. So here we can see actually the visualization of this. So this is the proportion of SMBs globally using digital tools. And you can see that advertising is the most at 60%, again, up from 40% in February 2021. So so February to July, so 6 months. You can see that communications has also markedly increased during the pandemic. And so more communications with customers are happening. Selling goods, I think this is brilliant. So just in a 6 month time frame, we've had almost a 10-point leap, in terms of people who are selling goods and services online. And so what we can see here is that more and more people are selling online, which means more and more people are buying online. And we're near that 50% mark, and we need to probably broach that to make it mainstay. And I'm hoping that we do that. I hope we really get to that point, and that we can have at least a silver lining with regard to the pandemic in terms of moving forward the digital needle for small businesses. We need small businesses out there doing the right thing, which is to be utilizing technology so that they can make it both more convenient for their consumers, for their customers, but also really managing the business data that they need in order to make good business data-driven decisions. And so I really feel like this heartens me, because while the pandemic has been horrendous, it at least is pushing us greater and forward toward more parity with big box. The more small businesses, the more SMBs use digital technologies, the more likely greater and better SMB technology is going to come out, which means those SMBs then can compete with big box brands and so on and so forth. So really good there. I'll note that the very minor items, which is analyzing or research to answer business questions, coordinating or collaborating with employees, hiring, all three of those stay relatively low here, which shocks me. I really thought that some of those things would have increased markedly, but hiring has moved up a little bit, but coordinating has stayed the same in that 20% range. You would think that that would actually have increased with more remote work and hybrid work environments. So I would just, encourage you all to go out there and really think about what you're doing in terms of bringing more and greater digital coordination with your staff that's out there. Another component that really, doesn't shock me but saddens me is that this report did note that minority and women-led businesses both remain severely impacted, over the general population of SMBs, and certainly over men-led SMBs. So 4% difference between women-led SMBs being closed globally versus male-led SMBs at 16%. So we're just seeing a decline in sales performance for female-owned SMBs. And again, this is probably a gender gap that's based on any number of factors like women having to care for children in the home and not having enough childcare or not being able to afford childcare. So they have to give up their business interests for purposes of caring for children, whereas typically men would not have to do so. And so they're going out there into the workforce and continuing their businesses. And that's just, it just, we need to fix those kinds of things. We need to provide stability for women to lead organizations. And we already know there is a huge disparity in the number of women led organizations. I think we have 33 million small businesses in the United States, and far fewer than what should be. We should have 50% of small businesses should be female, but I think it's only 20%. It's something very small comparatively in terms of leading those largest businesses. Certainly in Fortune 500 and so on and so forth, it's not as as gracious. You have even fewer women-led Fortune 500 companies and that kind of thing. So we need to really figure those pieces out. I don't have any solutions, but I just find it to be concerning to me. Because we should have parity. And of course, minority led businesses, as I said, are also disproportionately affected. Hispanic led SMBs or Latinx SMBs are in that category, obviously. And then there was just one thing that I wanted to cover kind of here in the summary of the summary is that they noted some really important features here, and I thought they were interesting to share. One is that it said that SMBs were optimistic about continuing their operations during this particular recovery process. So that's overall good. And just quoting some of this here, I'll say 60%, quote, 60% of global SMBs stated they could carry on for at least 6 months if current circumstances persist, an increase from 54% in February 2021. More than one-fifth of SMBs were uncertain about the health and safety guidelines for employees would be going forward, and 20% were concerned about their ability to comply with any such guidelines. 30% of SMBs expect a lack of in-person customers over the next 6 months, and 86% of SMBs surveyed globally indicate that they expect to run their business operations at least partly using digital type tools in the future, which is fantastic to see such a plurality of SMBs focused on using digital tools to get better, right? To just have a better, more competent business. And I think that's really, really important. So I'm also concerned at seeing that the biggest issues that they're concerned about are lack of demand. I don't particularly see that being as great an issue, but it seems to be something that a lot of these business owners are concerned about is lack of demand. It's lower than it was in and during the pandemic, but certainly those concerns have risen. Cash flow is a huge concern, as many of the economic pieces that the federal government had put in place are starting to subside, and consumers have less cash because now they're not being given subsidies in those regards, and so we're seeing cash flow potentially be a concern. And then, of course, concerns around, government and health authority orders, basically closures and other kinds of regulations, loans, finding supplies. There's a huge supply chain issue. If you're doing, for example, holiday sales or holiday products in general, you should start figuring those things out now because we're seeing huge supply chain issues across our clients in terms of getting things, satisfied. And so just be mindful that there are still a lot of unknowns here as it relates to, moving forward from and in the pandemic. But I think that the good point is that businesses stay optimistic and that they stay creative in the face of everything that we are dealing with here during the pandemic. So that is and were my thoughts this week relating to um, uh, the various issues that are going on in the state of small business. And so if I can find my notes here, then I can actually close out. Wonderful. There we go. Anyway, we have come to the end of our time together this week. If you've enjoyed the live stream, feel free to click the thumbs up icon. And that really does help us make new small business friends that brings them into the fold. And so thank you for doing that. If you have a question, again, like I said, you can leave a comment on the video or wherever you are listening or watching from. You can also then tweet or message us at W3 Consulting, at the number 3 Consulting on Twitter is usually the best place to reach me. And you can join us Mondays, usually 11 a.m. Eastern, unless we otherwise note it. Thanks so much for spending this Web and Beyond live with me. I'm Ray Sidney Smith on behalf of W3 Consulting and our subsidiary W3C Web Services. Have a great week ahead marketing your small business on the Web and Beyond.